Good morning. In 1956, in his famous essay dedicated to the exhibition, Roland Barthes wrote, "A big exhibition of photographs, the aim of which was to show the universality of human actions in daily life of all the countries of the world. Birth, death, work, knowledge, play always impose the same types of behavior. When I look at images from the exhibition, one of the first things that strikes my eye is multiplicity. The fact that in spite of the similarity of described situations in different areas of the exhibition, they do not constitute a unified mode of behavior. Let's take work and family as examples, and being photographed as a mode of behavior. A collective work, a group of men rowing. Their backs to the camera. They ignore the photographer. Eventually, one of them may turn his head to the camera. At worst, it might disturb the orchestration of their work for a second. In this photograph, the possibility of turning one's gaze to the camera seems less plausible. Whatever the concrete circumstances of the photograph, it reminds one of forced labor, corvée, and should stand for it. In the one from Pakistan, the work seems no less arduous, but the possibility not to be reduced to one's labor power is not entirely eliminated. Look how the three workers on the right are intrigued by the camera. This image appeared in Life. The caption in the magazine read, "Portraits of blacksmith Hugo Roots with his son Hugo Jr. The senior Roots choose not to join the Nazi party," unquote. They are not looking at the camera at all, but they are performing for the camera. They are not captured in a snapshot, but are collaborating with the photographer to stage the new old German through the restoration of traditional professions. Or take this famous pair of family portraits. Note the ancestors' portraits here on the right, behind the American family, and the supposed absence of cultural signs in the portrait from Bechuanaland. The two photos usually read as an evidence of the culture-nature opposition underlying the exhibition. But is this reading self-evident or necessary? The reading that attributes passivity to the members of the second photo, as if they were clay at the hands of the photographer who staged them so as to incarnate his own vision of them, may be easily rejected. The members of this family rather play with the authority of the camera and the implicit hypothetical spectator it incarnates, while obedience to its protocol can more easily be read in the American family portrait. Note how all its members, from the youngest to the oldest, are smiling in response to the cheese order, accepting the command to produce an ideal image of their family. Neither nature culture nor any other opposition is inscribed in these photos, and no such opposition can organize the reading of their juxtaposition. Both images give us enough reasons to reflect upon power relations in the family and the need to protect them within any renewed civil contract. To conclude these multiple tensions, let me dwell shortly on this photograph from the beginning of the book of the Family of Men, which was dismissed by many because it was classified as staged, as if Human Snapshot, to borrow the title of this conference, as if Human Snapshot can ever be solely staged. A young American girl lies abandoned on the grass in a wood. Very soon she will become a citizen, but now she is still subject to the authority of her father and cannot stop the act of being photographed by him naked. The identical format of black and white photographs showing humans in allegedly similar situations actually foregrounds to what extent the photographed persons differ from each other. Their crafts vary. their gesture multiple, and every expression or smile hint a different experiential world that cannot be organized along general lines of nation, gender, or race. It could be argued against Barthes that he projected his own thinking upon the exhibition. But reading Steiken's introduction, it becomes clear that Barthes repeats Steichen himself nearly verbatim. However, that which Steichen presents as the explicit purpose of the exhibition, that which it aspires to produce, is presented by Barthes as a critical analysis of what he sees in the exhibition, the ideology of which the exhibition is captive. Here is a quotation of Steichen, whose traces are easily detectable in Barthes' analysis. It was conceived as a mirror of the universal elements and emotions in the everydayness of life, as a mirror of essential oneness of mankind throughout the world. One can hardly keep from wondering about the ease with which Barthes is prepared to adopt the point of view of the exhibition's creator as an accurate description of the exhibition itself, and attributes to the curator's intention a nearly magical power to turn multiplicity into universal unity, or empty history and turn images into nature. Let us take a look at Barthes' The Spectator. He attends the exhibition, views hundreds of pictures, and seeing them all just one thing: abstract ideas, nature, universality, unity. Here it is in Barthes' word: birth, death, yes, these are facts of nature, universal facts. But if one removes history from them, there is nothing more to be said about them, unquote. Does Barthes really not know that ideas are invisible? That they do not exist out there as objects to be pointed at? Barthes, so it seems, claims he sees that which he cannot see, and misses that which does appear to his eyes, not just the fruit of the photographer's or the curator's intentions, but also independently or contrary to theirs. In addition, that which he does see, he perceives as entirely external to him, as though he himself has no part in making them abstract, as if someone could really remove history from the objects of his viewing, and as though these exchange relations between him and the photographed persons do not stand for a piece of history. Despite these limitations of the Barthesian text, I still propose to dwell on it for three reasons. The first, for a long time, Barthes shaped the intellectual reception of the exhibition and set the tone for critics that followed it, by Alan Sekula, Christopher Phillips, and others. Second, his conceptual observations are precise, even if Barthes' conclusions are hasty and miss the civil potential of photography. His claims should be taken in consideration in any further conceptualization of the exhibition. Regardless, the third point, regardless of the critic's judgment, millions of viewers visited the exhibition, and whether they criticized it or liked it, most of them understood that what was at stake in the exhibition was universality. Multiplicity did not escape Barthes when he dealt with writing. However, the enlightening insights he offered regarding the inability to reduce writing to a single source formulated his insight in their entirety in his seminal text, The Death of the Author, were usually forgotten by him when he faced photographs. Even when he did notice multiplicity in the photographs, it was one of forms or morphologies. It was this multiplicity, he argued, that the spectators were unable to see, because Steichen, according to Barthes, had the power to impose on it a single idea, his own. Steichen, the curator, emerges in Barthes' text as an omnipotent author, while the spectator becomes an impotent reader and viewer. I would like to quote from the way he formulates the myth. The myth functions in two stages. First, the difference between human morphologies is asserted. Exotism is insistently stressed. The infinite variations of the species, the diversity in skins, skulls, and costumes are made manifest. The image of Babel is complacently projected over that of the world. Then, from this pluralism, a type of unity is magically produced. Man is born, works, laughs, and dies everywhere in the same way. Anxious that the viewers would recognize the multiplicity, Barthes calls upon them to acknowledge it as unity. However, even if this is what Staken wished to show, a photography exhibition cannot be reduced to the voice of the curator. Dominant as he may have been, Staken's voice is but one more possible voice among many others resounding in the exhibition and through it. And even this voice itself is multiple, split and rife with contradictions, let alone the voices emerging from the photographs themselves. Look at this photo from one of the last sections of the exhibition, a section that one might entitle Protest or Becoming Public. I hope you can see the image. A claim is framed here. The woman addresses someone outside the frame. A second glance makes it clearer. She is at court, encircled by two policemen. She is accused of a crime. Nevertheless, she is the claimant here. The story was relatively known at the time. She had murdered her husband, who lied to her about their shared life, hiding his relation with another woman and the second life he had had without her consent. Men were usually those acquitted, in such cases legally defined as crimes of passion. This time, it was a woman who was found innocent because her crime was defined crime of passion. Like in many other photos of the exhibition, here too, a new articulation of the rights of the protagonist should be redefined beyond the realm of the family, as part of a renewed civil contract. His right to choose another wife, her right not to be compelled to share a life with another woman. The photographs are in fact hanging on the walls, unaccompanied by information that could have helped us know more about the photograph situation. But they are not stripped of history, as Barthes claimed. Their presentation, devoid of accompanying detail, makes them more malleable for the curator and more enigmatic or Rorschach tests of sorts for the viewers, who are invited to make them speak or project onto them their own thoughts and experiences. However, malleable as they might be, they could not be made into clay in the hand of a single creator. They bear traces of an encounter of multiple participants, and these, whether photographed or viewing, cannot be entirely subjected to any single person's intention. Lack of information is precisely what turns this exhibition into the utter opposite of that which is implied by the common argument against it and against its viewers. The public likes being spoon-fed. The photographs are displayed on the walls in a sort of rawness. And the viewer meets them not only free of any spoon held out to her mouth, but also not being offered any accessible, direct, explicit information that would help her decipher each photograph separately. And she is required to make her serious interpretative efforts. The photograph captions are restricted to names of photographers and countries. The former is informative, the latter rich in nuances, and in some cases make present or enables the reconstruction of the violence embodied in nation-states, sovereign regimes, or colonialism. Thus, for example, under the country name Korea, the curator chose an American soldier. Of the Middle East, the curator chose to present Palestine as one nation among others, thus challenging the wide recognition of the sovereign state of Israel, founded on the ruins of Palestine. Instead of preserving the nation-state as a stable territory and point of reference for comparative viewing that would manifest itself in the great differences of power relations between the states, the spectator can participate in the game differently, open up to the arbitrariness and reversibility of national delineations, and acknowledge yourself as part of a global citizenry, able to transcend national boundaries as the locus of sovereign power, and eventually imagine other forms of sharing the world, more beneficial to citizens than to nations. The display of photographs unaccompanied by information typifies the familiar ideology of one picture is worth 1,000 words. However, in the case at hand, it is clear that although the photograph is endowed with a special and favored status over the text, it is not presented as sufficient in itself and worth 1,000 words. On the very contrary, each photograph is presented as closely dependent upon its neighboring images, and these are usually multiple, and no form of propinquity is presented as more appropriate than others. From the moment one enters the exhibition, the viewer sees photographs in a structure that is complex, not transparent to the gaze. The form of organization of this exhibition, the multiplicity of photographs, the various sizes of prints, their dynamic installation from the ceiling in the center of the space, both vertically and horizontally, and the layers they create by means of perspex plates is such where the individual photograph has no sufficient conditions in itself to become a metonym, a metaphor, an allegory, or a capsule of the whole. On the contrary, each photograph is placed within a continuum of photographs that is supposed to build its specific context from which it appears, which it shapes, and in which it hangs. Through acts of careful choice, sorting, cataloging, and editing, the curator and his team try to emphasize certain contexts and even increase the chances of their being perceived by the viewers. However, other contexts, some of which the curators may have seen, but others which escape them, are created by the viewers, a result of their own editing in space. The photographs on display are associated almost automatically with the documentary genre. As such, viewing without any information about them feels lacking, partial, and faulty. However, the fact that all the photographs are presented this way enables us to think that we are viewing a different genre which activates the photographs in a different manner. The lack of concrete circumstantial information is apparent, especially regarding each individual photograph. But the systematic lack, not preferring nor discriminating any photographed person in particular, enables their reading as statements threaded with one another in a text that wish to say something else through and with them. Even if taken so to show universality through this composition, it would have been impossible. Universality, as I already mentioned, is an idea and is deprived of body and form. It is wrong to ascribe universality to what is inscribed in the photographs. Rather, universality is prescribed through the plurality of the photographed situations and their juxtaposition. The display as a whole can be recapitulated as a series of prescriptive statements in which universal rights are claimed. The general public, artists, curators, and researchers, who all identified it with universal aspiration, consistently turned this exhibition into a meaningful milestone in the history of photography and universal discourse, whether by their mere attachment to the exhibition or in the way they handle it. This exhibition should be seen as a harbinger of an unfamiliar, novel genre which has textual precedents, but this is its first appearance as a visual being. It is the genre of a universal declaration. A declaration is a decree, an order, an edict, or a ruling. It binds, or should bind, those whom it addresses. It is a verdict made public, a public announcement, a pronouncement, a promulgation, and a profession, an assertion, an insistence, a claim, an affirmation, an assurance, a kind of protestation, an objection, a complaint, a disapproval, a challenge, a dissent, an outcry, a remonstration. I propose to identify and characterize a distinct genre in order to pave the way for future declarations, as well as to take advantage of an important feature of such a genre, its being an unfinished text, one which living together requires its rewriting, its updating. This declaration took shape after World War II, in the rift that was then created through disappointment of the existential political regimes and in search for new horizons for being together. I shall attempt here to present the new genre and draw some of its characteristics, as well as point to several components of the composition that Staken created, enabling its emergence from within the exhibition. In order to begin exploring this genre, one should see what the exhibition does. As I already said, it does not tell history. Moreover, history is presented in the exhibition not as if this is the way things are, but rather contingently as reversible situations and divisions, which, by this contingency, could be imagined and arranged differently. Thus, for example, the photograph of the woman washing the floor as she kneels. It is indeed a black woman in the United States, spending hours on her knees as she scrubs the floor in a narrow, dark apartment. But at her side, a white girl is shown, you can see her below, no less distressful. The work frock she wears hints of suspected, forbidden child employment. The black woman alone, among all the working women photographed in the exhibition, raises her eyes in reproach, or at least dissatisfaction towards whoever stands over her and addresses him with some demand or other. Her plaint can be continued by the viewer out of the composition in which the photographs of these two women, alone in their Sisyphean tedium of house cleaning, alongside a photograph of a group of women on a riverbank, their camaraderie, the open air and cool water sweeten for them the burden of hand laundering while kneeling. Thus, although we know nothing about any of the photographed women, I might even be wrong in attributing to the black woman a position of arguing her working conditions, or seeing the girl as employed and not as engaged in helping her mother. But such possible mistakes, important as they might be in regard to the private story of each of them, are dwarfed in view of another matter that is at hand here, the conditions of women's employment. Not their documentation at a certain concrete place, nor their idealization, rather their scope as a basis for creating a rule. Thus, by mere juxtaposition, not only of far from ideal plurality of similar situations the world over, one can begin to wonder about the proper conditions for any of these situations. In other words, instead of reading the photograph solely in the commonplace of documentary genre, as showing the specific life conditions of each of the photographed women, I propose to read them also as a part of a repertory of states of existence and situations in which humans find themselves. Unlike Barthes, who through the heterogeneous whole of the photograph sees only eternal lyricism, I claim that the juxtaposition of several variations on each theme enables us to reconstruct a whole scope of variations, from the optimal, which should be claimed for all, to the one that demands intervention, correction, regulation, prevention, or prohibition. Being part of a declaration, the scarcity of information about the photographs enables one to see as entirely contingent and thus reversible, the link of the situation presented in the photograph to the concrete historical context. One might insist on saying that the photograph of the Bushman, in particular, is devoid of cultural attributes, but it is difficult not to notice that this procedure of reducing cultural attributes is applied to different populations and is not a sign used to create hierarchy. In this exhibition, everyone becomes Bushman. Even if one can point to a few pictures that echo or one or another stereotypes about populations of women or blacks, or about the representation of the two sides of the Cold War. What you can see here is a photo from USSR, and you can see the hard manual work and the huge combines in the American context. Still, one cannot but wonder at the movement of different signifiers amongst populations and geographic and cultural places in a way that makes their attribution to such and not to others contingent, and prevents relating any one of the states as essential to a particular population. So far, I have referred to three procedures used in the exhibition: abstraction from concrete information, juxtaposition of a scope of situations, exploitation and harm, and the creation of a contingent link between those situations and a geopolitical place. This enables me to state that we face a unique resource with which to compose a universal visual declaration of human rights, inviolable rights. Some of them are well known, some new, some by way of the positive, others of the negative. The right to free movement, the right to public association. We can look at these girls in the 50s. We can think about the public association of women at the 70s creating the anti-rape movement while they associate together and exchange their experience, realizing that they had been raped. The right of protest. Here we have a photograph from the family of men of protest in South Korea against the splitting, the second or third splitting of Korea. The right to remember, the right to adult education, which can be formulated from this photograph. The right to remember one's past. Here we have a photograph from Korea of mourning, and we can think about the recently declared law in Israel prohibiting Palestinians from remembering the Nakba. The right not to be photographed naked by one's father, and I am returning to this photograph from the beginning. Thus, declaring the rights of others implies a claim for a right of our own, the right not to be a perpetrator. And we can think of Einstein and the use of his theory for the elimination of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We can think of Germany about the right not to be a perpetrator. And we can think of Israel in 48-49, and me as a second generation of perpetrators being condemned to resist this position of being part of the perpetrators. Thus, declaring the rights of others implies this claim for the right of our own, the right not to be a perpetrator. A declaration with universal pretension, one that should constitute a point of reference in the regulation of human lives and can express their aspirations, cannot be a document by a single author. One can remind immediately of the declaration by Olympe de Gouges in 1791, 2 years after the declaration of male French declaring the rights of men and citizens. Since the declaration of the rights of men and of citizens, through the declaration of Olympe de Gouges, through up to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the UN in 48, we are dealing with a kind of palimpsest, Not only it is a product of orchestration and a compromise of multiple voices, it needs to be loose enough so that additional voices would not only be able to repeat it as is and thus use it to make room for themselves, but there is also need to rewrite it, to make room for that which earlier could not have been imagined as necessary. To the three aforementioned procedures that I mentioned, an additional one that I mentioned in relation to what Staken did in the exhibition, an additional one should then be located as having been activated in the exhibition, able to create the conditions for the appearance of multiplicity from within this visual document. I locate this procedure in the systematic distancing of sovereign instances. This exhibition is a first visual effort after World War II to constitute civil concert, not by beheading the sovereign, but rather by eliminating his signifiers par excellence and creating a space in which humans, survivors of a culture that mobilized them for total war, enslaved them for the private ambitions of various leaders who spoke in their name, imagined the possibility of a different world. Neither utopia nor idealization, but the possibility to restore being together on a human scale, human to human, rather than leader to leader. It is an exhibition devoid of leaders and an exhibition in which the army is not a means for maintaining order, and the soldier appears in it not as a hero, but rather as a survivor or as a corpse. Someone whose mere presence threatens civil order and the world of children. An exhibition that wishes to distance into the background the weight of nation, religion, and politics as national politics, turning all of those into components in a civil existence not totally mastered and organized by them. I shall illustrate this by choosing the photograph of the United Nations that appears toward the ends of the exhibition. The United Nations, the fantasy and its abuse, buds of dreams of a non-state and supra-state body that would serve as the world's highest tribunal, burst forth in the 18th century, with thinkers like Olympe de Gouges, Immanuel Kant, and Jeremy Bentham. Each of them, in their own way, envisioned the disaster lurking within natural borders of the sovereign state and imagined defenses, escape routes, and transcendence of the state's naked power. Since its invention, photography too was perceived as a potential basis for a civil supra-state framework. Benjamin gave this possibility one of his apt formulations. Photographic records begin to be evidence in the historical trial. This constitutes their hidden political significance. But ever since the 19th century, powerful sovereign states have used the idea of a supra-state framework as a way to advance the logic of the sovereign nation-state and assure its expansion the world over. The United Nations, like the League of Nations that preceded it, is responsible for planning, prescribing, and legitimizing partitions and deportations that uprooted millions of people in order to maintain, establish, and multiply nation-states. At the same time, the same international organization was compelled to take at least partial responsibility and practical steps for mitigating the plight of the uprooted. This might be witnessed, for example, by the disastrous resolution to partition Palestine, and a short time later, the foundation of an agency totally dedicated to aiding the refugee born of the implementation of this resolution. Let us for a slight moment imagine Staken, the curator, as someone who has not given up the civil, non-state aspect of the supra-state organization while resisting the logic of sovereignty which that organization amplifies. Let us imagine him browsing through multiple available photographs of the United Nations in order to select the one in which the marks of nationality and sovereignty slowly shrivel in order to make room of an image of a general assembly of citizens. And let me finish with these images. This is the the image that was chosen to the exhibition and the book. But let's start from this image that he eliminated, the image where the Universal Declaration of Human Rights took place in Paris. And see the insignia of the nation states here, see the leaders here, see the minimal role of the audience. Here we have the closed meeting. He skipped also this photograph of the closed meeting for the gathering, for the public gathering. This photograph already in the hall where the photograph that was chosen is taken in 52, the hall in New York, we can recognize it here. But here we have too many of the sovereign signs. And finally, it shows this image. If the possibility to formulate such a declaration is embodied by this exhibition, Steichen is not and should not be its sole author. Steichen was indeed the individual who took the initiative to collect such drafts from various places and organize them in a composition loose enough so that whatever emerges from it would enable millions of humans to identify in it themselves, their aspirations, their dreams, and remind the viewer of the ability, of her ability to participate in the updating of such a document and make this document a visual declaration of human rights, a committing one. Thank you.